how do we allow the good to manifest without succumbing to all of the bad, or vice versa?
Now, that's really the practical question, and Tay-Sachs is a great example of that. As we describe in the book, there's a group in New York called Dor Yeshua, means Community of the Righteous. So when it was discovered that Tay-Sachs is a heritable disease that causes death usually by the age of 4, it's especially predominant in the Jewish community. And so it was discovered that through genetic testing, it's possible to discover who are carriers for that disease. And in this Jewish community, they've been urging individuals, couples, to get tested to see whether they are carriers of Tay-Sachs prior to getting married. And then if they're both carriers, and therefore there's a heightened possibility that their child would inherit Tay-Sachs, they're urged, if they get married, not to have biological children, to adopt children instead. And they've seen the incidence of Tay-Sachs absolutely plummet. Now they're doing the same thing with spina bifida, the same thing with muscular dystrophy. There's a whole variety of heritable diseases for which genetic markers or carriers can be detected ahead of time. What makes that different is no one's imposing that. No one's coming forward and saying, if you are Jewish, and now we have to define what we mean by Jewish, or we could just say whoever you are, you must get carrier screening prior to getting married, not only for Tay-Sachs or Fragile X or whatever the condition might be, but for a whole host of hundreds, if not thousands, of heritable diseases. You must do that, both of you. And if both of you are found to be recessive carriers, you must not be allowed to have biological. Now you're back to Justice Holmes again. Now we're back to a kind of eugenics, sort of forced sterilization again. What we have here is a Jewish community encouraging, but not mandating, not requiring. That's the difference. That's really the American way. The American way has always been around community. It's part of the reason the 13 states of the United States, as you know, were seen to be so independent that if you look at the Constitution, the word states is capitalized, united is not. It's been said that prior to the Civil War, people would say the United States are. After the Civil War, they would say the United States is. There was this sense that Georgia and New York are so different that states' rights ought to predominate. And as you know, federal rights ought to prevail only where states' rights do not, and only where they had been on some level outsourced to the federal for things like an army, for things like a treasury, things that can be better done collectively. So part of the American experiment was to get governance as low to the ground as possible. The old Tip O'Neill statement that all politics are local. The idea that we want school boards deciding what our kids ought to be taught in a local context, not even a state, much less a national context, et cetera. But boy, hasn't that shifted, especially since the Great Depression, especially, quite frankly, since the FDR administration and the New Deal and the federalizing of so much of what used to be state and local. And now the whole impulse, back to your point where we started the conversation, now the whole psychology has turned. And now we're at a place where we're outsourcing our own welfare to the federal, to the experts, as they would think of themselves and as we would think of them. Boy, that wouldn't be what the founders would have understood America's idea to be.